I didn't feel triumphant when I bought that $900 junk house. I felt like I was being exiled with a receipt. The kind of receipt that doesn't list the price, just the consequence. The mist was rolling in low over the hills that afternoon, softening the sharp edges of the neighborhood like it was trying to shield me from the truth. I sat in my old Camry, engine off, windshield speckled with cold droplets, and stared at what I'd just legally made mine. The house was leaning. Not metaphorically. It physically leaned to the right, like it was tired of pretending to stand tall. I could see the sagging porch through a broken slat in the fence, the paint peeling in wide curls like old skin. One shutter dangled by a single hinge, flapping against the siding with every slow breath of wind. This was not a new chapter. It was a mercy page torn from the back of a book nobody finished reading. A week ago, I was still sitting at my parents' dinner table. Mom had made pot roast, her special Easter prep recipe, even though it was barely mid-spring. She always liked to test-run holiday meals, as if family moments needed rehearsal. Sierra sat across from me, glowing with the kind of polish you can only achieve when you know everyone in the room sees you as the favorite. She twirled her fork in her manicured fingers, speaking in that soft, curated tone of hers. "It's a retreat in Sedona," she said. "Not a vacation. It's about energy alignment, feminine expansion, deep sisterhood work." Dad was already nodding. Mom didn't ask for details. What mattered was the price tag. "It's $15,000, Sierra said, with no embarrassment. "But it's healing, and I think it's time." The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was anticipation. They were waiting for me to fill the gap. And I knew the script. I always had. When Sierra needed something, I funded it. Quietly. Proudly. As if generosity could buy love, or at least belonging. But this time, I broke the script. "I bought something," I said. Sierra tilted her head. "A necklace." I smiled tight. "A house." 3 words. That was it. No explanation, no request. Just a fact. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. This one was heavier, colder. Mom's knife paused mid-cut. Dad blinked slowly. Sierra's lips parted, then closed, like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or scold. "A house?" Mom finally asked. "Where?" "Salida." "Why?" Dad's voice had that edge. The one that said I'd made a foolish decision, and now I'd better justify it. "It was $900, I said. "It needs a lot of work." "But it's mine." That was the moment I became foreign in my own bloodline. No one shouted. They didn't have to. Their silence was a verdict. That night, I got the text. "Do not come to Easter. There's no place for you here anymore." No signature. No warmth. Just finality. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at my phone until the screen faded black. And then I packed. Slowly, methodically. Like someone clearing a room before the wrecking ball swings. Now, parked outside this decaying relic of someone's long-forgotten dream, I finally understood what starting over really meant. It wasn't an Instagram slogan. It was gravel sticking to your shoes, a mailbox hanging by one screw, and a silence so wide it echoed your thoughts back to you. I popped the trunk. Pulled out a rusted folding chair I'd inherited from a garage sale 3 cities ago. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fatigue. Emotional fatigue has a weight that sleep can't fix. I unfolded the chair right there in the gravel, in front of the crooked porch. I sat slow and careful. The mist dampened my jeans instantly. And I whispered it like a promise I didn't know how to believe yet. "This is mine now." The words didn't sound victorious. They sounded like surrender. But somewhere beneath that, beneath the shame and the rejection and the uncertainty, there was a flicker of defiance. A kind of quiet rebellion. This house and we were both broken, but still standing. They couldn't even spell my name right on my 16th birthday cake. Maybe that was the first sign. Not a dramatic one, no screaming, no slamming doors. Just a sloppily iced "Happy Birthday Maria" in pink letters, even though my name is Marla. I remember standing there, plastic fork in hand, wondering if it was a joke or just laziness. Sierra laughed and said, "Well, close enough," and everyone else moved on. That was the theme, really, me being close enough to count, but never enough to matter. Now, years later, I stood in my new house, if you could call it that, trying to pin up an old, faded curtain from my college apartment. I had no tools, so I used 2 rusty nails I found near the back door. The curtain slipped within seconds, sagged, and then collapsed entirely, the fabric falling like a defeated flag to the floor. I didn't bother picking it up right away. I sat down on the cracked floorboards, knees bent, back leaning against the cold wall. The rain outside tapped against the warped window panes in no rhythm I could follow. The air inside smelled faintly of mildew and wet paint, old wounds trying to dry, but never healing fully. My belongings fit into one cardboard box. One, and yet the house still felt crowded. Not with things, but with memories I never asked to bring along. I remember a family trip to Disneyland when I was 11. Or rather, I remember not being in the photos. Sierra stood center in every frame, Minnie Mouse ears tilted just right, Dad crouching beside her, grinning. I was there, I know I was, but somehow I was always off to the side, half out of focus, cut off at the shoulder or turned away mid-step. One photo made it into a frame on the living room shelf. Sierra with her ice cream cone, smiling at the camera she held. I stood behind her in that picture, half visible, mouth open mid-sentence, but the crop cut me out completely. Mom framed it anyway. Back then, I thought it was just an oversight. That if I tried harder, stayed quieter, got better grades, they'd see me fully next time. But maybe they weren't forgetting me. Maybe they just chose not to see me. I pulled my box closer, hands brushing the flaps like it might offer comfort. Inside was a folded blanket from college, a chipped mug, and a few picture frames I hadn't looked at in years. One caught my eye, my high school graduation. I stared at it for a long time. Sierra had taken the picture. You could tell from the angle and how the focus was entirely on herself, beaming in the foreground in her sundress. I was in the background, wearing my cap and gown, mid-step, half turned toward the parking lot. But you wouldn't know that if you looked at the framed version on our family mantle. They cropped me out. I remembered Dad saying, "That's a good picture of the day," like the day belonged to all of them except me. I didn't even get a congrats card. Just a lukewarm, "Well, now it's time to get serious," as if I'd been playing around until then. I sighed and pulled the blanket around my shoulders, shivering as the cold from the floor crept into my skin. The mildew on the ceiling had started to spread, a dark blossom above the window, like grief left unattended. That's what it felt like, grief. But not for someone who died. For someone who never fully existed in the first place. My phone buzzed. I jumped slightly, no one ever called me. It was a voicemail. From Mom. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the play button, heart thudding like it didn't know which direction to run. "You were never the problem," Aunt Ruth said. "You just weren't Sierra. That was your only crime." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words until they landed. Like a hand on my back when I didn't know I was falling. The phone had buzzed just as I was brushing crumbs off the cracked countertop. For a second, I thought it might be another notification from a credit app reminding me I had no score to speak of. But when I looked down and saw Ruth Duval light up on the screen, I froze. Her name felt like a living thing, a heartbeat from a part of the family I'd nearly forgotten existed. No one had called since Easter. Not after Mom's text disinviting me. Not after I quietly left the family group chat on my own terms. I figured I'd disappear and no one would notice I was gone. But Aunt Ruth noticed. I answered on the fourth ring, not to seem eager. "Hey, Ruth." "Oh, honey," she said, and just those two words were enough to crack something in me. Her voice was like chamomile tea, warm, slightly sad, and steeped in truth. "I saw what happened," she continued, her voice soft. "You know they removed your name from the group chat like it was nothing? No explanation. Just gone." I laughed, but it came out dry. "Guess I made my choice." "No, sweetheart," she said. "You made a stand. There's a difference." I slid down to the floor, my back against the unplugged fridge. The little space heater nearby clicked and hissed like it was trying its best, but barely hanging on. Kind of like me. "I just didn't want to fund Sierra's yoga retreat," I said, keeping my tone light. "Apparently that makes me selfish now." "You weren't supposed to say no," Ruth replied. "That's the real issue. In that house, agreement is love. Disagree, and suddenly you're a stranger." I bit my lip. The truth in her words was sharp. "You know," she continued, "when I was about your age, I told your mother she was being unfair to your grandmother. She didn't speak to me for a year. That took me by surprise." "You? But Mom always said you chose to drift away." She laughed, but it wasn't joyful. "That's the story they tell when they want to feel righteous." There was a pause. The heater kicked louder for a second before quieting again. "I stayed quiet for years after that," Ruth said, "because I thought maybe if I stopped making waves, I could stay close. But you know what? I was never close to begin with. Just tolerated." I closed my eyes. Her words were too familiar. "They always come back around eventually," she added. "Usually when they need something or want to pretend nothing happened. But don't you dare forget what this feels like right now." I didn't respond right away. My throat tightened. The room felt both too big and too small all at once. "Because this," she continued, her voice breaking a little, "this right here, this clarity, this is yours. You don't owe them forgetting." And just like that, it hit me. I cried. Not the kind of crying that comes from anger or helplessness. It wasn't explosive. It was quieter than that. Like a leak from a faucet you didn't know was broken. It had been weeks since someone called me by my name and meant it. Not Maria, not Sierra's sister, not the ungrateful one. Just Marla. Just me. Ruth didn't try to rush me out of it. She stayed on the line. I could hear the soft shuffle of her moving to sit down too, maybe with her tea, like we were in the same room. "I know it's cold over there," she said after a while. "I can bring you some blankets next week." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. "I'd like that." We said goodbye, no fuss, no big promises. Just a goodbye that felt like a beginning. Then, just as I was setting the phone down, the voicemail icon popped up. From Mom. My thumb hovered for a moment. I didn't feel ready, but curiosity has its own gravity. I pressed play. "Sweetheart," her voice cooed, sugar-laced, rehearsed. "It's been on my mind lately, and I thought maybe we should talk. You've always been the bigger person, Marla." That sentence had followed me like a shadow for as long as I could remember. It was never a compliment. It was a muzzle. A polite way of saying, swallow it. Don't make this harder for the rest of us. The frost was thick on the inside of the kitchen window that morning, enough to make the air sting, even with the little space heater groaning at full blast. My hands were red and raw, the skin tight and burning as I scrubbed at the old floorboards with a vinegar rag I'd boiled over the single working burner. The wood wasn't going to shine, but I think I needed the illusion of trying. My phone sat on the counter, speakerphone on, Mom's voicemail replaying through the room like an old ghost pacing the hallway. "Sweetheart," she began, always that word when she wanted something. "It's been heavy on my heart. What happened?" And I just feel like maybe there was a misunderstanding. She didn't mention Easter, or the text she sent me that said, "Do not come." She didn't mention Sierra's retreat, or how the family turned cold overnight. No, she talked around it, wrapping her guilt in lavender words. "You know how sensitive Sierra is," she continued. "And your timing, well, it just caught her off guard." I let the rag drop into the bucket. That was the thing about Mom. She could make your boundaries sound like a betrayal just by adjusting her tone. By the end of that message, she'd painted herself as heartbroken and me as thoughtless. "You're the strong one, Marla," she said, her voice dipping low. "You always forgive. That's who you are." I stood there, staring at my phone like it might melt through the countertop. That line stuck in my chest like something undigested. "You're the strong one. You always forgive." What she meant was, you make it easier for us to hurt you. I picked up a pen, a sticky note, then another. It started small, phrases that had echoed in our house for years. "Be mature. Let it go. She didn't mean it. Don't make a scene. Family comes first." By the time I was done, a small pile of them curled slightly at the edges, like they already knew they didn't belong here. I took the framed graduation photo from the corner of the living room. The one where Sierra held the camera and somehow cropped me halfway out of the shot. They'd framed it anyway, like it was fine. I peeled off one of the sticky notes and slapped it on the back of the frame. This is not who I am. I didn't cry. Not this time. Something colder settled in. Not bitterness, just clarity. A kind of awareness that felt like shedding a second skin. It wasn't just that they had failed to see me. It was that they had trained me not to see myself. Even now, in her syrupy voicemail, Mom wasn't reaching out to connect. She was reaching out to reset the dynamic, to make sure I'd play the role they assigned me, the bigger person. But what if I didn't want to be bigger? What if I wanted to be equal? The heater let out a tired rattle before going silent. I stood still, fingers still gripping the edges of the picture frame. Then, 3 knocks on the door. Not frantic. Not casual. Deliberate. Measured. My heart stuttered. I didn't move. Just stared at the door like it might reveal its intent if I stayed quiet long enough. I thought of Sierra. The way she never yelled. The way she smiled while delivering backhanded compliments. The way she once confronted me about a missing lipstick like it was a federal crime, calm, slow, surgical. These knocks sounded like her. Not loud. Just timed. My breath caught. Whoever it was didn't knock again. I set the frame down and walked slowly to the front window. I couldn't see anything past the warped glass and frost. Just shapes and shadows. But something in me shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to answer out of habit. I stood still in my own house, and I let the knocking echo without responding. She arrived in cashmere and attitude, tapping her heel like she was waiting for room service. And there I was, kneeling in the mud, gripping a splintered fence post like it was the last bit of structure in my life. I'd been trying to reset the sagging corner of the fence all morning. The post leaned like it had given up on standing long before I ever bought the place. My palms were already coated in dirt, my jeans soaked at the knees. So when I heard a car door shut and that unmistakable tap 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 of pointed heels on gravel, I didn't even turn around. I already knew. Sis. Sierra's voice rang out like a bell at a brunch spot, over-friendly, over-loud, and entirely staged. Aunt Ruth's words floated through my mind. They come back. But not to apologize. They come when they need something. Wow, Sierra said, sweeping her gaze over the porch, then the fence, then me. Look at you. So ambitious. I stood, wiping my hands on the rag tucked into my back pocket. She looked like a catalog page cream cashmere sweater, shiny lips, sunglasses perched like she was 5 minutes from a vineyard tour. Her hair was perfectly curled. Not a speck of effort in sight. What do you want, Sierra? I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. She blinked, clearly wounded by my lack of warmth. Can't I just visit my sister? I raised an eyebrow. Well, she continued, smoothing her sweater, there was an incident with the plumbing at the spa house, burst pipe or something. Totally unexpected. And, well, hotels are weirdly full this week. So I figured, why not check in on you? She smiled like it was a good deed. So you're here for shelter, I said plainly. Just a night or two, she chirped, as if that would soften the blow. You know how I hate imposing. She glanced toward the house. Her eyes lingered on the rotting shutters and broken gutters. You've always had that rustic charm vibe, she added. I almost laughed. There was a moment, brief, quiet, when I considered slamming the door before she even got near it. But something in me clicked. This wasn't a visit. It was reconnaissance. And maybe letting her in would teach me something. Fine, I said, stepping back. But don't touch anything. She lit up like she'd won something. You're the best. Inside, she did what she always did, acted like everything belonged to her. She swept through the living room with her designer boots, inspecting the place like it was an Airbnb she'd accidentally booked at the wrong star rating. It has potential, she said, running her fingers over the chipped paint on the stair rail. Her voice was syrupy, but I could hear the smug smirk underneath. I busied myself in the kitchen, making tea I didn't offer her. She hovered near the doorway, casually looking at the notes still stuck around the house, the one on the fridge that read "You don't owe peace to people who profit from your silence." Sierra didn't ask about them. Of course she didn't. That night, I tried to ignore her presence entirely. I curled up in my room, book in hand, door closed. But just as I was drifting toward sleep, I heard it. Laughter. Soft, controlled. Then a pause. Then the unmistakable click of a phone camera. It was coming from the kitchen. I sat up straight, heart thudding. What could she possibly be photographing in my house? She called it Great Depression chic. My kitchen. My life. I hadn't heard her say it directly. Not at first. I was still half asleep, wrapped in a blanket, the floorboards creaking under my feet as I shuffled toward the smell of reheated oat milk. Then I heard her voice, bright, performative, coated in that sugar dust tone she reserved for strangers she needed to impress. And this is where the magic happens, Sierra said, sweeping her hand across the kitchen like a tour guide at a forgotten Airbnb. You know I love a good raw aesthetic. We're embracing imperfection here, angels. I froze in the doorway. There she was. In my kitchen. Full face of makeup before 7 a.m., ring light set up against the sink, phone propped in a tripod made out of books I hadn't unpacked yet. She was live streaming. To actual people. We love a redemption arc, she cooed, tilting the camera toward my rusted fridge. No fridge magnet left behind. Her oat milk sat neatly beside chipped mugs I'd been using for weeks. She didn't bother hiding the contrast. She highlighted it. Her followers weren't watching her help me. They were watching her curate me. I stood there, unseen for a moment. Just a silhouette in my own home. Then a voice filtered through from her phone, a comment read aloud by her text-to-speech plugin. "Is that really your sister? She looks like a squatter." Sierra laughed. That soft, manicured laugh of hers. "Oh, you guys," she said, her voice practically glittering. "She's in her healing era." And then she turned the camera on me. There I was, in pajamas, hair tangled, holding a chipped mug I hadn't realized was cracked. On display. A prop in her show. I walked over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yank the phone. I simply reached out, pressed the stop button, and pulled the phone off the tripod. "You want real content?" I said, looking her square in the eye. "Get out." She blinked, lips parted. Not from guilt. From shock that I hadn't played along. "Marla, it's just awareness," she started. "It's going to help you." "Help me?" I repeated. "Help me how?" "By calling my life aesthetic poverty." She picked up the ring light like it might protect her. "You're being dramatic." I pointed to the door. "One night, you said." That was the deal. She didn't argue. Not really. She packed in a flurry of practiced motions, brushes zipped, phone tucked, oat milk dumped in her branded cooler bag. Before leaving, she stopped in the doorway. "You'll regret this," she said softly. "People were starting to care about you." I held the door open. "They cared about you," I said. "I was just your background." When the door finally clicked shut, the silence that filled the house was louder than her whole live stream. That night, I made tea and sat in the stillness, grateful for the quiet hum of the water heater and the scratch of wind against the shutters. Peace, even the imperfect kind, had weight. I opened my laptop to check my email and paused. The subject line read, "Help my sister rebuild. Sierra Duvall's campaign goes viral." My breath caught. It was a GoFundMe page. My name, my face, my house, all wrapped in a paragraph Sierra had written. "She's too proud to ask, but my sister is rebuilding her life after a series of tough breaks. Let's show her that she's not alone." Hashtag sister support sisters. There were photos, ones I didn't remember being taken. One of me reaching for a wrench by the porch. One where I looked down, sleeves rolled, expression weary. No context. Just pity bait. And money. Over $3,200 already donated. I stared at the page, pulse thudding. For a moment, I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. She turned my survival into her storyline. I'm a paralegal, Colorado certified. And what she's doing might be wire fraud. That was the first message from someone named Elsie Tran, tucked into my Instagram DMs like a stray leaf blown under the door. I almost didn't open it. My thumb hovered over the notification for a full minute. I'd had enough strangers reaching out in the past 48 hours, most of them sending pity or judgment wrapped in emojis and hashtags. But this one was different. No emojis. No "stay strong, sis." Just facts. Calm, direct, almost clinical. Elsie had found the GoFundMe Sierra created, the one plastered with my name, face, and a fabricated story of hardship that conveniently omitted the part where Sierra staged the whole thing without my consent. I responded, "Is it really fraud if she just twisted the truth?" The typing dots danced for a moment before her reply came. "If she used your identity and image to raise money without permission, yes, especially if she's profiting. Let's walk through it." I paused. Aunt Ruth's warning came back to me like a whisper in the kitchen. "She'll make you look crazy if you confront her." Let the receipts talk instead. It had sounded like survival advice at the time. Now it felt like a strategy. The rain outside pattered steadily against the windows, and the house was wrapped in that thick gray stillness that only seems to show up in the middle of things, not the beginning, not the end, just the thick of it. I curled up on the couch with my laptop open, charger cord trailing across the floor like a lifeline. Elsie walked me through everything. Screenshots, timestamps, archive links, even ways to record the page's donation history without alerting Sierra. She was patient, but not coddling. "We need to be accurate," she said. "If this goes legal, emotions won't carry you. Documentation will." I liked that about her. No drama, just clean, sharp steps forward. At one point, she sent me a template, a cease and desist letter. It looked intimidating at first, words like defamation, unauthorized likeness, good faith resolution. But she guided me line by line, customizing it. By the time we finished, my screen showed a polished, signed document with my digital signature stamped at the bottom. I didn't tremble. I exhaled. I didn't even know I'd been holding my breath. It wasn't just about Sierra anymore. It was about me, finally stepping off the stage she built for me and walking into my own narrative. Elsie didn't promise any miracles. She didn't say Sierra would fold or apologize or even acknowledge it. But she did say this: when someone crosses a line in public, you don't have to shout back. You just draw your own and make it legal. I closed my laptop and stared out the window. The rain had softened into a mist, blurring the pine trees in the distance. The house still smelled faintly of mildew and oat milk, but something inside it had shifted. Something inside me had shifted. That night, I made dinner, nothing fancy, just canned soup and toast, but it was the first meal in days that didn't taste like resentment. I even lit a candle, not for ambience, just to feel like I had made a choice. Later, while scrolling, I saw Sierra's latest Instagram story. A picture of a ring light and a caption: "Going live this weekend. Time to tell my side." I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I bookmarked the story, took a screenshot, and labeled the file. Sierra_live_promo_evidence_7A. Mid-live stream, a nervous assistant handed her a manila envelope. And everything stopped. I wasn't watching it live. I didn't need to. Elsie and I had timed the delivery down to the minute. She said, "Deliver it right when the audience is watching. Let the silence speak louder than the lawsuit." Sierra's healing talk had been announced on every platform she used. The promos were glossy, full of lavender smoke and soft focus photos of her posed in front of tea candles and quartz towers. The caption read, "Let's talk truth. Let's hold space. Let's rise above the noise." It was held in a small event hall at her wellness center. From the photos people shared online, I could see the ambience was meticulously arranged: golden drapes, fairy lights, and a giant screen behind her with the word transparency projected in flowing script. She wore a pale blue jumpsuit that probably cost more than my car insurance for the year. Her hair was curled softly at the ends, makeup glowing in that carefully natural way that takes 3 hours and a professional team. The room was full, not just of people, but of expectation. "I want to begin by saying, I come from love," she said, hands clasped in front of her heart. "I've been painted unfairly, and I've chosen silence, until now." She spoke slowly, pausing to breathe, to let emotion tremble in her voice, just enough to seem real. "I never wanted attention. I only wanted to help a struggling family member regain her footing." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. From my porch, mug of tea in hand, I watched a few clips float onto social media. The lighting was soft, but her words were sharp, each syllable dipped in performative grace. Then came the moment. A young assistant, likely unpaid, stepped up to the edge of the stage. He looked unsure, caught between duty and dread. In his hand, a manila envelope. Sierra saw him. Her smile faltered. She took the envelope slowly, eyes scanning the bold letters printed across the front. Legal notice. Cease and desist. She opened it on camera. And for once, she didn't know where to look. Her fingers trembled, not dramatically, but just enough. She tried to keep going. Cleared her throat, said something like, "Sometimes people lash out when they're hurting." But the rhythm was gone. She stumbled over her words. The chat on her live stream went wild. What's that? Did she just get served? Is this part of the performance? She didn't answer. The assistant took a step back. The camera caught her blinking, just blinking, frozen in the lavender-scented spotlight. Then, the screen glitched. Buffering. A moment of static. And the live stream ended. No goodbyes. No sign-offs. Just digital silence. It was almost poetic. I didn't cheer. I didn't dance around or pop champagne. I just sat on my porch and sipped my tea while the online world did what it always does: mutates, investigates, devours. By nightfall, Reddit threads had bloomed like mushrooms after rain. Hashtag Sierra Unmasked. Hashtag Let Her Out. Wellness grifter gets served midstream. Screenshots of the GoFundMe. Old clips of her live stream calling my house, tragic but cute. Even a resurfaced video where she claimed to have built her brand from nothing, conveniently omitting our parents' funding. The truth wasn't neat, but it had finally grown legs. And it didn't need me to run. I let it all pass, like thunder rolling through a valley I no longer feared. Inside, my phone buzzed again and again. Notifications stacking up like raindrops on the porch railing. But I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I watched the clouds move. I listened to the wind shift. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. It wasn't joy I felt. It was stillness, like the air after a tree falls. Not silence, exactly. Just an absence of noise that had once masked a deeper hum. I sat on my porch that morning, watching the steam curl from a chipped mug of chamomile tea. The wood beneath me was rough and sun-warmed, flaking at the edges like old bark. But it held. It always held. The world hadn't ended. It hadn't even paused. Birds still argued in the trees. Mrs. Rizzo's lawn sprinklers still clicked on with military precision. And somewhere down the street, a kid was learning trombone, badly. Online, though the storm hadn't quite moved on. Sierra's name was still trending. Reddit was frothing with new threads dissecting her wellness brand. Old clips resurfaced, and people who had once praised her for authentic healing were now questioning her every filtered photo. I didn't join in. I didn't comment or like or share. Instead, I read quietly, scrolling through with a kind of detached curiosity, like walking past the ashes of a house you once lived in. My phone buzzed with a message from Elsie. "They're eating her alive. You okay?" I typed back, still standing. Just letting the ground settle. She sent a heart, then added, "Remember, you don't owe anyone a response. Not even the ones who now believe you." I stared at that sentence for a long while. She was right. I didn't owe them. Any of them. Still, the messages trickled in. From cousins I hadn't heard from in years. From an aunt who once told me I was too sensitive. Even from my dad's brother who, last I heard, Thought Instagram was a type of medication. We had no idea. If only we'd known sooner. You've always been so strong, Marla. It was strange how quickly people rewrite history when the wind changes direction. I didn't reply. Not out of spite. Just out of clarity. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't reopen wounds already healing. Later that day, I walked into town. Not to get away. Not to hide. I needed wood filler and new nails. The hardware store still smelled like sawdust and machine oil. Familiar. Honest. I wandered through the aisles without urgency. Let my fingers graze over paint swatches, metal handles, garden gloves. I picked up a cheap potted succulent near the checkout. Something green. Something alive. As I stepped outside, arms full of small repairs, I passed a mother and daughter sitting on a bench by the bakery. They were laughing, uncontained and open. The girl spilled a little juice on her jeans, and the mom didn't scold her. She just wiped it gently, still smiling. I watched them longer than I meant to, not with envy. Not this time. With peace. Maybe some families weren't tangled in hierarchy and guilt. Maybe some daughters were allowed to spill things and still be loved. I didn't ache for it anymore. I simply acknowledged that it existed, and I was okay not being part of it. Back home, I unpacked slowly, placed the succulent on the windowsill near the sink, set the nails in a mason jar by the door, taped up a loose corner of the kitchen tile, not fixed, but cared for. The mailbox creaked when I opened it. A single envelope inside. Manila. Again. Formal type on the front. Complaint filed. Sierra Duval. Counterclaim. My stomach didn't drop. My heart didn't race. I just stood there, envelope in hand, the wind tugging at the hem of my jacket. Of course she would. Storms don't end quietly for everyone. I didn't expect the waitress to remember me. But she did. You were the quiet one. The old neon sign of the diner buzzed faintly above the door, colors faded from decades of sun and wind. I pushed inside, letting the smell of coffee and fryer oil wrap around me, more familiar than my childhood living room. Vinyl booths lined the windows. The jukebox in the corner was spinning Sinatra, Fly Me to the Moon. Soft, a little wobbly, but stubbornly there. I hadn't set foot in the place for years, not since high school when Sierra used to insist on the booth nearest the jukebox, the best view, her words, and somehow always pick the song, the sides, and the conversation. I just paid the check, quietly, almost invisible even in those tight little corners. The waitress behind the counter was Jean. Hair a shade of red no longer found in nature. Lipstick to match, smile bright and soft at once. She was carrying a tray of milkshakes to a booth of rowdy teenagers, but she caught my eye and there was a little spark of recognition. Marla, right? She called, with that raspy voice you only get after 20 years of refilling coffee and doling out life advice. Haven't seen you in a bit. You were the quiet one. I laughed. More out of surprise than agreement. That's me. Still quiet. She winked. Nothing wrong with that, hon. I took a seat near the window, choosing for myself for maybe the first time. The vinyl squeaked beneath me. I ordered coffee, black, and a side of hash browns. Out the window, Main Street glowed in the sun, dust motes floating over rusted pickups and wildflower beds. An old couple sat at the next table, he with a BO low tie, she with a blue cardigan buttoned up wrong. They were bickering gently over a crossword. I offered a smile and helped the man open a stubborn ketchup packet. He thanked me, not with words, but with a nod and the kind of grateful look that says more than small talk ever could. Jean came back with my coffee. You know, you always were polite. Sierra was, well, she liked being seen. She said it kindly, but her meaning was clear. I nodded. No need to defend anyone anymore. A moment later, my hash browns arrived, crisp, golden, exactly as I remembered them from high school. For a while, I just ate and listened to the lull of old voices and the gentle rise and fall of laughter from the teenagers behind me. Halfway through my meal, the old couple got up to leave. The man pressed a $2 bill into Jean's hand and tipped his hat to me. The woman paused at my table, touched my shoulder, and said softly, "Nice to see someone help, even with the little things." When I went to pay, Jean waved me off. "Covered," she said, nodding at the couple's retreating backs. "On the house. That's how it goes here." It was subtle, quiet, like me, but it felt like being wrapped in a blanket I didn't know I'd missed. As I sipped the last of my coffee, Jean leaned over. "You were always in the background, Marla." "Not anymore." Her words hit harder than I expected. For so long I'd wanted to disappear. Now, invisibility felt more like a choice, not a punishment. I slid out of the booth, gathering my jacket, heart lighter than when I came in. I thanked Jean, nodded goodbye to the line cook, and headed for the door. As I passed a corner booth, a woman in a dark sweater looked up from her phone, recognition flickering across her face. She didn't smile, didn't scowl, just studied me for a beat. "You're the one from that live stream mess, right?" she murmured, low enough for only me to hear. I hesitated, hands tightening on my jacket. For a moment, the urge to shrink away returned. But then I caught Jean's eye behind the counter, her quiet support, the sense that maybe I belonged, even if just for coffee and hash browns. I met the woman's gaze and nodded, a little smile in my voice. "That's me. But I'm more than that, too." She looked away, back to her coffee. Not unkind, not curious, just letting me be. Outside, the air felt sharper, the sky wide and blue as the diner's neon sign. I walked home, steps slow, shoulders back. I wrote it in one sitting. I never meant to mail it. But it wrote me. It was one of those evenings when the world seems to shrink to the small circle of candlelight on a kitchen table. The rest of the house faded into darkness, just the gentle hiss of wind through old window panes, the sigh of floorboards cooling for the night. I had found a pad of yellowed stationery at the bottom of a drawer, soft at the edges, perfumed faintly with thyme and lemon. Maybe I had been writing this letter for years, in the space between birthdays and Mother's Days, in the quiet that came after every family gathering where I was an afterthought. Tonight, the words simply arrived. My hand moved across the page, and my heart kept pace, steady, not bitter. Dear Mom. There are things I never said, things I thought would disappear if I ignored them. But I see now they never went away. They just took up residence somewhere deeper. Do you remember the year Sierra got that car? I do. I remember the smell of the upholstery, the way Dad took pictures in the driveway, and how everyone laughed when she honked the horn for the first time. I remember asking for lessons, for just a seat at the table. I remember, maybe next year. I remember birthday cakes with the wrong name. Marla instead of Maria. Sometimes not even that. I waited for you to notice, to ask if it hurt, but you were busy, always busy, with Sierra's plans, Sierra's heartbreaks, Sierra's shining days. I remember standing at the window, breath fogging the glass, watching for your car to pull up after a late night. Hoping you'd bring me back something, a story, a hug, proof I mattered in the little ways. I remember the year I won that writing contest. How you put the certificate in a drawer, but the plaque for Sierra's swim meet went on the wall. I told myself it was fine. I got used to celebrating in silence. I paused, hand cramping, pen hovering above the page. I let myself drift back, just for a second, to those old hurts. It didn't sting like before. It just was. The past, immovable. My present, different. I used to think love was something to be earned by being good, by not rocking the boat, by stepping out of the way so others could shine. I thought if I swallowed my questions, stayed small, you would finally see me. But I understand now. You were always going to choose her. Not because I was unworthy, but because you didn't know how to see both of us. Maybe you were never seen either. Maybe all you knew was the script of giving love in pieces. I don't need to be chosen to be whole. I don't need you to apologize for the things you can't remember or for the ones you do. I have built a life, board by board, with my own hands. This old house and I were still standing. Maybe someday you'll read this. Maybe not. I wrote it for me, not for you. Goodbye, Mom. I put down my pen and exhaled, a long, slow breath, as if clearing out a room that had grown too crowded. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt the quiet warmth that comes after letting go. I folded the letter in half, then in quarters, pressing the creases until they stayed. I placed it in a shoebox with old photos, one of Sierra's birthdays, one of Dad at the grill, one faded snapshot of me in a Halloween costume no one remembered. I closed the lid gently, slid it to the back of the closet, and locked it away. No one needed to read those words but me. The candle had burned low, a soft pool of wax collecting at the base. I stood and stretched, feeling the tension slip out of my shoulders, lighter than I'd been in months. I thought about Aunt Ruth, her voice in my ear. Closure isn't something we get. It's something we give ourselves. She was right. It wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting. It was about claiming the space those old stories took up and filling it with something kinder. My phone buzzed on the table, shattering the stillness. For a second, I almost didn't look. Then I did. A notification from Sierra. You've been tagged in a new post. My stomach fluttered, not dread, not exactly anticipation, but something in between. A familiar feeling, but now it didn't control me. The letter was written, the past was put away. I could answer, or I could not. Either way, I was whole. She wasn't crying when she came back. She was calculating. It was midday, sunlight pouring over the small, wild patch of front yard I called mine. The breeze rustled the oak leaves and made the rusted fence squeak, that old familiar music of solitude. I was kneeling in the grass, pulling weeds from the patch by the steps, when I heard the unmistakable crunch of expensive heels on the gravel. Sierra's silhouette was picture perfect, hair glossed, dress immaculate, sunglasses big enough to hide an army of emotions. In her hands, she carried a cellophane-wrapped gift basket, stuffed with organic fruit and teas, a ribbon the color of the Colorado sky. She paused at the gate, scanning for witnesses. Mrs. Rizzo's blinds quivered across the street, and I caught a glint of her glasses. I smiled to myself. Nothing happened on this street without Mrs. Rizzo watching. Marla, Sierra called, voice pitched up, almost sunny. Got a minute? I didn't stand immediately. Let her wait. Let her see that I wouldn't drop everything anymore. Eventually, I wiped my hands on my jeans and got up, meeting her at the fence. I didn't invite her inside. She held out the basket like an olive branch. I wanted to see how you're doing. You know, after all this mess. Her tone was rehearsed, her eyes flicking over my shoulder as if a hidden camera might catch the angle. She stepped closer. The basket had a little card. Thinking of you, Sierra. I took it, held it without enthusiasm. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice as neutral as the sky overhead. She launched into flattery. Honestly, I admire your strength, Marla. Most people would have folded under all that pressure. I know things got, well, dramatic, but it wasn't my fault. The media loves to twist things, you know how they are. I just watched her, let her keep going. Her speech was smooth, the kind you practice in the mirror, searching for the right blend of contrition and self-preservation. Sierra looked around, maybe hoping Mrs. Rizzo would see her doing the right thing. She went on, we could maybe do a joint post? Show people that we're moving forward? I think it would help both of us. End the drama. Maybe even get ahead of the next story. I realized, with a pang that almost made me laugh, that Sierra still saw the world as a stage. Every act had to be visible, every step a performance. Even her apology, if you could call it that, was something to be witnessed, curated for an audience I never asked for. I nodded along, polite, letting her say her piece. When she finally paused, I set the basket on the porch railing and looked her in the eye. I appreciate the gesture, Sierra, I said, but I've already moved on. I don't need a post. I don't need to explain anything to anyone. I'm done. For a moment, her face froze, not with hurt, but with genuine disbelief. It was as if she'd rehearsed every possible outcome except the one where I simply refused to play. Her mask slipped just a little. You're nothing without this drama, she spat, the edge of her old competitiveness breaking through. You think anyone cares about your little house, your sad story, if I don't put you in the frame? Her words didn't sting. They sounded like a script from a show I'd already turned off. I picked up the basket and handed it back to her. Take it with you, Sierra. I don't need anything from you. She looked stunned, mouth open for a retort that never came. I turned and walked up the steps, feeling the sun on my back, the rough wood under my palms as I opened the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't yell. I just closed it gently, letting the click settle in the quiet. From across the street, I heard it, a single, deliberate clap. Mrs. Rizzo stood at her window, nodding once, the smallest smile on her face. For a second, I thought I might cry, not for the loss, but for the simple power of being seen, understood, without fanfare. Sierra lingered on the porch, maybe hoping I'd come back out, maybe expecting one more round. But I didn't move. I leaned against the door, heart beating steady, the old house settling around me like a second skin. Outside, Sierra's heels clicked away down the walk, farther and farther until they faded into the hush of afternoon. I stood there, feeling the soft tremor of relief, the echo of Mrs. Rizzo's applause growing louder in my chest than any scream or spectacle ever could. It wasn't about winning. It was about choosing, finally, not to play. I planted marigolds along the side fence. They grew where nothing else would. The old fence was barely holding together, boards leaning, half the paint long since surrendered to wind and sun. But the earth below was soft, dark, and patient. That morning, I knelt with a flat of gold marigolds, the kind that promise something cheerful even when everything around them looks like surrender. The sun wasn't strong yet, but the light was kind, brushing over the porch, warming the chipped bricks by the steps. My hands were filthy, caked with cool dirt under every nail. A gentle breeze carried the clean scent of cut grass and last year's fallen leaves. I had to dig out a few stubborn weeds before laying the first flowers in, but the rhythm of it, the scrape of trowel, the crumbling of earth, the careful placement of roots, was the closest I'd come to peace in a long time. Aunt Ruth used to say, "Some things only bloom when nobody's watching." I didn't understand that as a girl. Back then, everything in our family was a performance, holidays, awards, even sorrow. Now, with my knees in the dirt and the quiet hum of bees somewhere under the porch, I started to understand. Growth didn't have to be noisy. It could be the slow, uncelebrated turning of soil, the daily return to a task only I would notice. As I pressed a marigold into place, I heard the screen door next door slam. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the neighbor's teenage boy, tall, awkward, all elbows and uncertain energy, hover at the edge of his yard. He gave a tentative wave, half hidden by his hood. I smiled and nodded, not pressing for more. He lingered, then called, "You need a hand?" "Sure," I replied, sliding over the extra trowel I'd found in a thrift shop box. He took it, kneeling in the damp grass beside me. We didn't talk much. The silence between us was gentle, not uncomfortable, a welcome change from the brittle quiet that once filled my childhood home. Together, we worked our way down the fence, planting bright marigolds in a crooked line. Every so often, he glanced up, as if checking to see if he was doing it right. I let him figure it out, offering a tip here and there, but mostly just sharing the task. From the porch, Mrs. Rizzo watched with her mug of tea, giving her approval with a small wave. Across the street, I caught a few other neighbors glancing our way, this time not with suspicion, but with curiosity, maybe even respect. Midway through, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my old jeans. I wiped my hands and answered on speaker. Aunt Ruth's voice came through, warm as a kitchen on a snowy morning. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you gardening?" she asked, a hint of laughter in her tone. "I am," I said, looking at the patchwork of colors starting to line the fence. "Marigolds. They're stubborn little things. I think they're perfect." Aunt Ruth chuckled. "You've finally grown your own fence, Marla. Not to keep anyone out, but to show where you begin." Her words landed deep, gentle as a balm. "I never thought of it that way," I replied, but maybe I had. This house wasn't a boundary. It was an outline of the person I was becoming, someone who could choose what to let in and what to let go. The teen boy finished his row, leaned back on his heels. "Looks good," he said quietly. I smiled. Couldn't have done it alone. I meant it. As the day drifted on, I kept tending the garden, fixing loose boards, sweeping old leaves off the porch. I ran my fingers along the railing, rough and splintered, then noticed a set of faded letters and numbers carved into the wood, DB 1992. Some former owner, marking their place, saying, "I was here." On impulse, I fetched a pocket knife from my drawer inside and carved, small, neat, right below the old etching, Marla D. 2024. It wasn't about claiming territory. It was about belonging, about leaving a piece of myself in the bones of this house, a quiet answer to all the years I'd spent feeling nameless in my own family. When I stepped back to admire the work, the teen gave a thumbs up, then headed home. I watched the marigolds, a wavering line of gold, and let myself feel proud, not because someone was watching, but because I was. Later, as the porch hummed with the gentle traffic of bees, I sat with a glass of lemonade, reading the local paper someone had tucked under my door. On page 6, buried between ads for lawnmowers and lost pets, was a small article. Former viral subject restores abandoned house. Neighbors say she made it a home. There was a photo, me kneeling in the dirt, planting the first marigold, hair wild, face half hidden. No fanfare. No taglines. Just a life in progress. For a long moment, I let the words settle. Not infamous, not invisible, just a neighbor, a gardener, a name carved where it belonged. As dusk crept over the porch, the gold of the marigolds seemed to glow from within. Growth, I realized, is rarely loud, but it lasts. I set the table for one, but I left a second chair pulled out, just in case. Twilight settled over the little house, washing the kitchen in a gentle, dusty blue. The paint on the walls was finally even, a pale buttery yellow I'd chosen myself. For once, no one else had weighed in on the shade, or offered advice I didn't want, or quietly suggested something more neutral. The window over the sink framed the last of the day's sun, and the old radio on the counter hummed out the soft scratch of jazz, Sinatra, maybe, or some lesser-known crooner with a voice as smooth as good bourbon. The table itself was battered oak, scavenged from a garage sale, but tonight I had draped it with a faded linen cloth, blue and white checks, and set out 2 plates. One for me. One, as always, for someone who might arrive. Hope, memory, or maybe just the open possibility that I didn't have to fill every empty chair with longing. It felt strange, and then it didn't. I moved quietly in my own kitchen, barefoot on the cool, clean floor. A salmon fillet sizzled in the cast-iron pan, mingling with the sweet scent of baked squash, rosemary, and garlic. On the counter, a lemon cake waited, cooling, its surface still cracked from the oven's uneven heat. Cooking for myself, for so many years, had been an afterthought: toast, a leftover sandwich, a microwaved something on a paper plate. Tonight, though, I made the effort. I wanted the ritual as much as the meal. Jazz danced around the room, and I hummed along, feeling oddly at ease. I folded a cloth napkin, set it on the second plate, and lit a single tapered candle, letting the glow soften the edges of the old kitchen. There was beauty in the details, silverware I'd polished just for me, the bowl of apples in the center, the sprig of fresh mint by the water glass. As I sat down, I looked at that empty chair, not with sadness, but with a kind of gentle recognition. For years, I'd been the placeholder, the one who adjusted her seat, made room, settled for leftovers, smiled through meals where my name was misspelled or ignored altogether. The one who waited for an invitation, or worse, for permission. Tonight, the invitation came from myself. I lifted my glass and, almost shyly, toasted the quiet to peace, hard-earned and fully mine. The first bite of salmon was perfect, crispy at the edges, lemon bright. Each flavor felt like a promise I was finally keeping to myself. With every mouthful, I remembered holidays past, when I'd hovered at the edge of the table, refilling everyone's glass, scraping plates, listening to laughter that felt rehearsed. The empty chair beside me now was not an absence. It was an open seat for grace. It was the freedom not to apologize for taking up space, or for savoring a meal cooked by my own hands. The radio played on. I found myself swaying a little in my chair, not for anyone's amusement, but because the music made me feel alive and, for the first time in a long while, safe in my own company. Between bites, faint voices rose in the corners of my mind, echoes from the past. Be grateful for what you get. It's just a meal. Don't make a fuss. Why are you so sensitive? They faded, softer than the jazz, less powerful than the warmth filling the kitchen. When I sliced into the lemon cake and took a forkful, I thought, this is enough. More than enough. At some point, I realized I was smiling not for show, not to reassure anyone, but deeply, privately. I wasn't waiting for someone to walk through the door or for a voice to tell me what I was worth. I knew it. I had built it, bite by bite, night by night, until this meal was not just food but celebration. Solitude, I realized, was not loneliness when I chose it. A meal made for one, made with intention and love, was still a feast. The candle flickered low. The sky outside went indigo. I cleared my own plate, wrapped the second one for later, just in case tomorrow I felt like company or just a second helping. There was no rush. Then, as I wiped down the table, I noticed the letter, wedged under the door, slipped in sometime during dinner. No return address. Just my name, written in a familiar, looping hand. I sat, heart steady but curious, and opened it. It began. I didn't know how to say this before. The words blurred for a moment as I let them settle. Maybe an apology, maybe not. Maybe closure, or maybe just another beginning. Whatever the letter held, I felt ready. The kitchen glowed gold, and for the first time, the home I'd built was full, table for 1.5, and every possibility in between. It wasn't the apology I wanted, but maybe it was the truth I needed. Clouds pressed low over the mountains that afternoon, a dull pewter sky flattening the light. I sat on my porch swing, wrapped in a faded patchwork blanket, knees drawn up, mug of coffee cooling on the rail beside me. The house behind me felt sturdy and still more like home with each quiet day that passed. On my lap rested Sierra's letter, the paper creased and worn already, as if it had been waiting in someone's drawer for years. I'd read the first line again and again since last night. I didn't know how to say this before. The words weren't an apology, at least not in any way I'd once longed for. Sierra wrote in careful, looping script. She never once said she was sorry, but she did something that was maybe harder. She let herself be seen. She wrote about being afraid. Not of me, not of what she'd done, but of disappearing when the lights went off and the eyes turned away. Of being the good daughter, the golden child, the one who knew how to hold a room. She wrote about watching me fade into the wallpaper, about knowing she played her role too well, about moments when she needed me not as a rival, but as a witness that she was more than the sum of what our parents wanted. She wrote, "When I pushed you out, it wasn't to hurt you. I think I was trying to keep myself in." I stopped there, breath held. All my life I'd thought she was simply cruel, born with a sharper edge and a hunger to win. I'd never considered how desperate she might have been, how performing for love had been her prison, too. She admitted things I hadn't expected. How the GoFundMe was partly a cry for validation, her own as much as mine. How she kept painting herself as my rescuer, not because she believed it, but because she was terrified of becoming irrelevant when the drama died down. There was no request for forgiveness. No invitation to begin again. She didn't even sign off with love, just her name, curling in ink. I read the letter slowly, letting the words land in the small, empty spaces inside me. Somewhere in the quiet, I remembered being 12 years old, sitting at the window, watching Sierra laugh with friends on the lawn. I remembered the ache of wanting to be let in not to her spotlight, but to her world. I thought of the years since, the battles fought and lost, the hope that one day we'd simply be sisters, not opponents in some endless contest for affection. When I finished the letter, I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger either. What I felt was more complicated, a strange, gentle validation. We had both been shaped by the same silent hands, taught that love was something to be earned and measured out, not simply given. We'd been sisters, but also strangers, each locked in a story that only made sense if someone else was losing. The air grew colder. I tucked the blanket tighter, then folded the letter along its old crease, feeling its weight one last time. Letting go, I learned, isn't passive. It's an act of will, a choice not to keep feeding the old ache. Sierra hadn't asked for forgiveness, and I wasn't offering it as a prize. What I could give, I realized, was release, mine and, perhaps, hers. I stood, walked carefully down the porch steps, and knelt by the little fire pit in the yard. The marigolds along the fence glowed even in the dull light, a reminder that something beautiful could rise from worn ground. I struck a match, touched it to the edge of the paper. The letter curled, the ink blistering, the words drifting away as smoke. I watched until the last ember died. When the silence settled, I whispered, to no one and everyone, we could have been sisters. The ache didn't vanish, but it changed gentler, less sharp. I felt taller somehow, stronger. The wind rattled the porch swing behind me, and I let myself breathe in the scent of cherry blossoms from Mrs. Rizzo's tree across the street. As I stood, brushing ash from my hands, there was a soft, tentative knock on the porch rail. I looked up to see Mrs. Rizzo, holding a pie cradled in a dish towel, her gray hair in its usual loose bun. "It's Cherry," she said, her voice warm. "Thought you could use some sweetness today." For the first time in ages, I didn't shrink from kindness. I smiled, reaching out for the pie, the warmth radiating from the crust and from the hands that had baked it. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. As the sun edged low behind the clouds, I carried the pie inside, letting the scent fill the kitchen. I set 2 forks on the table, one for me and one for the quiet, powerful letting go that had brought me here. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't always about mending what was broken. Sometimes it was about setting it down gently and choosing to walk on lighter, but never empty. They called it a junk house, but it stood. So did I. The sun poured gold through my kitchen windows, painting everything in warm rectangles, old floors, fresh painted trim, even the battered table now bearing the gentle patina of use. Outside, the marigolds nodded in the breeze, and the porch swing creaked softly as I leaned back, notebook open on my knees, the blue pen poised above a clean page. There was a time I wrote lists, goals, improvements, impossible things I thought might earn me a place at someone else's table. But now, as golden hours settled over the neighborhood, I wrote memories. Not the big, noisy moments that make it into stories, but the quiet wins that stitched my life back together. The first pot of coffee I made in my own kitchen, before there was a table to sit at. The way the neighbors' kids drew chalk hearts on my walkway last spring. The taste of the lemon cake I baked just for myself, when the house still smelled faintly of old paint and hope. My handwriting was unhurried. I didn't need to prove anything. I wasn't waiting for a parent's approval, or Sierra's jealousy, or even Aunt Ruth's sage encouragement. I was here, really here. And for once, that was enough. Somewhere up the street, laughter rang out. The teen boy from next door, Ben, trotted over, waving a hand shyly. His mom followed, carrying a pitcher of lemonade with beads of condensation running down the sides. "Afternoon, Marla," she called. "Ben made cookies. Mind if we sit a spell?" I smiled, scooting over on the swing to make space. "Porch is always open," I said, and I meant it. Ben set the plate between us, still warm, the smell of peanut butter and chocolate filling the air. Mrs. Rizzo wandered by, basket in hand, and paused just long enough to wave before heading on her way. It struck me how different neighbor felt now. Not a witness to my struggle, but a participant in these small, gentle victories. We sipped lemonade, the sweet tart chill grounding me in the present. Conversation drifted from gardens to summer plans, to the little things that make a place a home. Ben's mom asked, "Did you always know you'd stay here, Marla?" I looked out at the house, the sagging roof now mended, the porch rail rebuilt with my own hands, the fence lined with stubborn marigolds. I thought about how the town had laughed at the idea of anyone making something out of this junk house, how even I doubted, sitting in my car that first misty day, heart bruised and raw. I think I said slowly I didn't know what I needed until I had it. But yes, I think I did. Just then, a couple walking their dog stopped at the end of the yard. The woman shaded her eyes and called out, "Excuse me, is this your place?" I laughed, the sound light and true. "All of it," I said, letting the pride bloom in my voice. There was no shame anymore. No ghost of the old Marla, anxiously scrolling through family group chats, wondering why she wasn't enough. I no longer watched from the sidelines. I no longer needed an audience to validate my belonging. The house, this once forgotten patch of peeling paint and broken floorboards, was mine as much as the air, the sunlight, and the simple grace of a shared porch on a golden afternoon. Later, as the sky deepened and my guests headed home, I lingered on the swing. I listened to the wind stir the marigolds, to the low hum of bees finding their way back to the hives, to the quiet that used to feel like exile but now felt like peace. I looked around, at every room, every board, every corner touched by my hands. The junk house stood, still a little crooked, still imperfect, but alive with stories that belonged only to me. This is who I am, I thought, smiling. Not a problem to be fixed. Not an afterthought. Not someone's lesson, rival, or scapegoat. Just Marla, whole in a home that fit her just right. I'm just someone who, like you, has walked through seasons of doubt and healing. After following Marla's journey, I wanted to share a few thoughts with you from the heart, because I think stories like hers don't just belong to fiction. In many ways, they're reflections of what so many of us quietly endure. What touched me most in this story wasn't just the struggle, but the quiet resilience it takes to keep building, even when you feel unseen or misunderstood by those closest to you. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought behind closed doors, choosing to be kind to yourself, to rebuild from the ground up, and to let go of the need for approval. Marla's journey reminded me that peace is found not in winning someone else's love, but in learning to love the life you create for yourself. I wonder, have you ever felt left out, even among your own family? Or found yourself having to start over in a place that didn't look like much to anyone else? I'd truly love to hear your story, or just a thought that crossed your mind as you read. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe leave comment number 1 to let me know you're here, or tell me where you're tuning in from. It means more than you know. If this story brought back a memory, or maybe inspired you to look at your own journey differently, please share your feelings in the comments. It's these quiet moments of connection that remind us we're never truly alone, no matter what stage of life we're in. If gentle, true-to-life stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe or follow so you'll be the first to join us for the next chapter. Your presence here makes all the difference. Thank you, truly, for walking with Marla and with me through all 16 chapters. Your time, your empathy, your willingness to listen, it's the greatest gift a storyteller can hope for. Wishing you peace, healing, and a home that feels fully yours, wherever you may be tonight. Until next time, take good care.